Welcome to the Practice Accelerator Podcast, powered by Blue Camel. This podcast is all about the business of dentistry. We talk to dentists from all over to hear stories of what works. The ups and downs provide you guidance for your own practice journey. Whether you're an associate thinking of starting a practice, own one practice, or many, our goal is to help you succeed in the business of dentistry.
Awesome. So super excited for this episode of the Accelerator Podcast. We've got a special guest here, principal and partner in Ripple Projects, Mike Mackay. We are talking about building a practice. We're always talking about building practices, but today we're talking literally about building a practice. And who better than a construction expert, a builder expert, developer expert. Mike, super excited to have you on the show today. And why don't you tell the folks, the audience, a little bit about yourself and your background as we get started.
Well, thanks, Arvin. Yeah, excited to be here as well. And I think a little background is we're a small boutique firm that specializes in commercial and residential work. And I think, our passion is driven by design and influenced by, a lot of great architecture and, around throughout the world. And a lot of the work we do, whether it's on the commercial side or the residential side, is driven by space and use of space. And when it comes to something like dental practices, obviously it's important that there's a flow and that they work and that, patients feel comfortable and good when they come in. And I think a lot of that is driven through, a heavy experience in high-end residential work that we've transferred through into design build type of work through our commercial as well. And working with many great designers and architects to create individual and unique spaces for different businesses and homeowners. And that's sort of the background of what we do. And obviously we're sort of the middle of what happens, or the quarterback of the project. So from start to finish and moving the project through from the initial phases of budgeting through into actual physical construction, working through design and value engineering elements of a project to get to a place where the client is ready to start construction, and passing along information and helping assist as we're the professionals in that. And obviously, if you're a dentist, we're not experts at looking at teeth or things like that. So that's sort of a background on how Ripple started and where we are. Obviously, the name starts with an idea and then ripples out from there. And I think that's like anything. That's how things start and they move, and things are fluid. So that's a little background on Ripple and how we got here.
Awesome. And I love that you're talking about creating unique spaces. And I talk to dentists all the time. Everyone, if we look at a dentist, they go to school, they get similar education, but the practices are very different. And part of that is each individual dentist has their own unique expression of how they carry out dentistry, their own characteristics, personality, and all of that. And one way to express that is through the physical building, the space, working, as you say, with the architects and designers and all of that. And we'll get into that, whether you should have one or not, and how do you guys work. But I think this is a super important thinking point for dentists that are looking to start a practice, or even have pre-existing practices, or they bought a space and they want a facelift, and how they would do that, and what considerations. So I guess to start off, if you're looking to start a practice, does a dentist go for a freestanding building versus in plaza or an office building? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you got to look at that from a couple different angles. Obviously, in a freestanding building, it may give you more exposure for marketing purposes, and you may have more presence to the public. You typically are probably going to have more overhead and costs involved, because in a shared environment, whether that's in a small, say, single plex or low plex, or in an office tower, you're going to have shared costs for operating that building. which is split among all the tenants in the building. Whereas if you're in an individual building, you're going to be carrying all the weight of those costs. So that'd be your heating, your cooling, your electrical, maintenance on, if you have snow removal or gardens, maintenance on the exterior, depending on what your climate is. And you're going to have those expenses to look after. And in a building, those costs would be split typically and shared among all the tenants. So the more tenants you have and the more it gets split, the common areas, common elements within those buildings. You do have more flexibility depending on if you're in a standalone building, you probably have more ease of doing what you want and flexibility as far as you may have better parking and maybe better access for your clients and patients. So there are benefits to both. Probably from a financial point of view, a standalone building is probably going to be you're going to be more expensive to operate in that type of building. If you're looking at capital appreciation and you want to have a real estate holding as an investment as part of your business, then it's good. It is another opportunity to look at purchasing building, and then you see the capital appreciation of the real estate as time progresses on. Now each market is different, so for example, if you're in downtown Toronto and you purchased property 10 years ago, you would have doubled your value, at least, maybe even more on a commercial site.
Wow. So there's pros and cons to both, and depends on, I guess, coming back to spending some time for a dentist on the vision of what they want. If they're, like you mentioned, if you're a downtown metropolis place, then parking is a consideration. If you're in a suburban place, maybe you don't mind being in a plaza because there's lots of parking everywhere. And so, and then also what type of experience do you want folks to have? And then even your timeline. I didn't think about that. Your capital appreciation. Are you going to have multiple practices? Then are you also selling real estate when it comes time to exit? So very cool. And so when you get to, I guess, you find a site, and whether you're going to lease or whether you're going to buy, you want to make some changes to it. How do you choose a contractor when you're building? Can I go to any contractor? How do people find out who's a good contractor? What makes working with someone like you versus, well, I know a guy, they do plumbing and electrical. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think know a guy. We all know guys, and we know a lot of guys because we're in the building business.
Yeah.
So we know a lot of guys. But I think when it comes down to it, I think the best way personally is word of mouth. So, obviously inside any type of profession or industry, there's going to be people you can talk to within your peer group. I think, talking to them, getting experience from other people. Obviously there's a lot of social media out there where you can find out about, get reviews and reports. And I think that's helpful. I think that word of mouth and talking to actual people that went through the experience is probably more relevant. If you're going on to Google review purchasing something on Kijiji and it's an item, I mean, that's a little different. But this is your future of your business. This is the future of your family's business and how you're going to grow, and whether you're going into one practice or multiple practices. So I think it's a very important part to take the time to get the right partnership, because it is a partnership for both parties, whether that's the project manager builder like us and yourself. Take the time up front. A lot of what I would say where there's the cons is people don't spend much time selecting their builder, and then that doesn't get rung out to later in the project where they're like, oh, I really wish I would have picked somebody else, or they're not the right fit for us. I think, obviously experience is one thing. You want to talk to different builders and different people in the industry to know if they have any experience building this type of a practice. It's not that, let's put it this way, it's not rocket science, but there are subtle differences. There are things that once you've done one or two or three and you have done a staple of them, you're going to learn from, like anything, once you do it multiple times. So I would say it's important to, and then, have face-to-face meetings or meetings with your builder, get a feeling. And there's obviously, trust is a big thing. You need to get a feeling and a comfort of trust. Is that feeling you have? And, you're going to be in a relationship for a year with this and maybe longer, depending on, permitting process. We'll talk a little bit about that probably coming up, but, this isn't going to be just an 8-week relationship that you have with your builder. And usually might be even an ongoing relationship after for maintenance and things like that. So partnering up with the right partner is, I think, very important, and spending some time in the beginning to get that right partner is key.
That's an awesome point. So it's not necessarily looking through Google and then calling the top 3 people you see there. There's a process to selecting. What I'm getting from you is sit down, meet face to face, and have kind of a gut check, intuition, and ask around. So what is the difference between that term GC or general contractor versus project manager? And I think you've mentioned, are you guys both, or would you consider yourself more as a project manager? Can you elaborate a bit?
I think, you're sort of, I guess, GC is sort of a term, general contractor, where a lot of times that general contractor may self-perform a lot of their own work, and they may have a crew that does a lot of their own work. So they may have their own carpenters, perform that, their own drywallers, possibly. And then project manager like us, we don't typically self-perform a lot of work. We basically coordinate and bring in sub-trades to do the work, whether that's electrical, plumbing, drywall, carpentry work, millwork. And then we put the team together and we manage it from start to finish. You may have on a GC may not do all that management for you. They may not be, they may say, okay, look, we're just here to do the building and we'll give you price to do that part. But then when it comes to procuring and getting the materials you need, and we basically, as a project management company set up that way, we look after everything from procurement to right through to the finish of the project. A lot of times involved very early on the design phase and budgeting the project and helping from a very early on stage. The GC typically would not work to value engineer and budget early. They may come in and then just bid on a job and say, okay, this is a fixed price job. We're going to go in and to build out this practice is going to be X number of dollars to do that.
Interesting. So for that, then when you're dealing with either or, whether it's a general contractor or a project manager, it's really getting in the contract or the roles and responsibilities, accountabilities. What are you actually doing? What is the dentist paying for? Like, have that super clear. But when talking to you, it sounds like you let your clients know that, hey, we're procuring it, we're quarterbacking it, as you say. We're going to see it from start to finish. Like, it's turnkey. You, on the end completion date, you'll have a key. You can physically unlock the door and walk into the facility. Lights will turn on, water will run, and the machines, the iTero scanner, etc., whatever equipment that you're installing, the HVAC, etc., will be ready to go.
Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate. I would say the only thing typically is that you may not be putting the dental chairs and that stuff in. Typically, that in the dental industry, most of the time there's a relationship with your suppliers of the equipment that they also supply things that you need to run your practice. So we would basically, any project management company or GC would get it to the point where it's ready for fit out of the actual physical equipment. Everything would be run, the electrical, the plumbing, and then the chairs would come in, the X-ray machines would come in, and that's basically at the end, the last month, the fixture, and then open. So yeah, I mean, you're accurate. Sure.
Cool. Great. And so alongside the contractor or the project manager, who else do I need? Do I need a designer? Do I need an architect?
Yeah. So this is where, we've worked in many different situations, and this comes down to a couple of things. How much time do you have if you have a running an existing practice, and this is another practice, how much time do you have to allocate to building another practice? If this is your first practice, how much time do you have to put towards design, and you have passion and interest in that? So that's going to kind of drive how much of a level of you want to have either an interior designer or an architect. There will be, from a permitting process, there's certain things in every municipality or jurisdiction is going to be different. So what you have to put in for your permit application will depend on where you are in a municipality. The things that you're going to need to have is you're going to need to have a mechanical engineer that does design work on the HVAC system inside the facility. You're going to need typically an electrical engineer that will do life safety, so that if the power goes out, There has to be lights that come on and exit signs, things like that for the public to get out. You will need a design done that meets code, whether you have barrier access things with wheelchair access and handicap washrooms. So typically you would need an architect to do a plan with their stamp on it, and then a mechanical and electrical engineer. The mechanical engineer will typically look after the plumbing aspect as well. You need a team of people to do that put in during the permit process, and then do inspections along the way, and then sign off for the building department as you're in your municipality to get open for occupancy.
Cool. And so working with general contractor versus a project manager, the general contractor has a specific scope. Would they have that kind of list or people? Or is that something that a dentist would be Googling as well? Like, oh, I need an HVAC engineer, look for one. Or, how does someone go about finding an HVAC engineer or designer? Or does good firms have those and someone coming to you, you'd make a recommendation?
Yeah, if somebody came to us, we would make a recommendation. We've worked with a lot of different designers, architects, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and we would typically help put the team together. Obviously, you could do that on your own, and you could, again, go through a search process. Typically, you would start with, if you were doing it on your own, for example, as a self-practitioner, you would find the architect first, because the architect is going to have the relationship to the mechanical, electrical engineers that they've worked with. So, usually you would find your architect first, and then typically they would put together their mechanical and electrical engineers that they work with. And that just shortens down your workload. And also they're going to have a shorthand that they work with, that engineer, and makes it smoother. You could go out and find each individual party, but then you're going to be the one that has to liaise between the architect, the mechanical engineer, and the electrical engineer, and make sure that their drawings are syncing. There's a sequence you work from. So typically you're going to work on your design first with the layout of your space, your reception area, your exam rooms, your kitchen area, your washrooms, have the architect do that. And then you come in with the mechanical and electrical and plumbing to fit that. So, it's knowing the sequencing to go through. And typically, your architectural starts first. Once you get your space, you work within that space, and then get the other consultants that you need on board.
Great. And so you'd mentioned designer a couple of times and architect. Are they one and the same? Or is there a nuanced difference between the two?
They're not one and the same. Typically, you need an architect to put in for permit. Architects have stamps, and typically a designer doesn't. So the architect would put in they know what building code is, and they're reviewing it from that perspective. A lot of architecture firms also have design either in-house, or a lot of them do. So you can go to an architect and get design both for the code compliant areas and also for the interior design elements. If they don't have that, it might just, maybe they're just code architects. They draw you up a floor plan that works, but they don't get into the finishing details. So, your flooring, the lighting, the paint colors, the look and feel of the place. That's where an interior designer could come in, and you would use an interior designer for that to select, how the mood is, how the feel is, what the furniture looks like, what the millwork looks like. But you could get that out of an architecture firm as well. So you could go architecture firm designer, or you could go just with an architecture firm. If, you've done multiple practices, sometimes you just need a standard, what your look and feel is, sort of like I'm not going to say franchise, but if your look and feel is the same on most of you're going to open multiple practices, you probably don't need necessarily a lot of design influence by that point, because you already know what your look and feel is. So you may just need architectural plans for permit, and then you're going to use a very similar millwork, similar tile finishes, and similar furniture package in your reception area.
Cool. That makes sense. And so then if I've got the designer, I've got the architect connects us to the engineer, mechanical engineer, and we've got the project manager to quarterback the entire thing. What about city permits? Is it the same thing? I know personally, I've done rentals on a house, and certain things you need a city permit for, other things you don't. Can you talk a little bit about what these are, and do I need them when opening a practice?
Yeah. Obviously, in commercial, it's different than residential. It's probably a little bit tighter on the permit process. There is, when you're doing renovations on the residential side, there's typically a little more leeway if you're not changing structural and doing things like that. On the commercial side, there's obviously, when you're dealing with the public, they're stricter on code issues and regulations. And so you really want to pedal back to the beginning and make sure that when you're looking at spaces, that the zoning of the building or the site that you're looking at works for your application, for what your purpose is. Because you're going to be in a medical zone thing. Some places allow that. Most places do, but you just want to make sure and check up front that that building allows that use if you're of what you're doing. And then from there, you're going to need, I would say there's probably, if you're building a practice out, you're going to need to put in for permit. And first of all, any tenant or any landlord is not going to typically let you work in their building without a permit, because you have plumbing, electrical, and that obviously has to be done to the codes. And then the municipalities aren't going to let you do anything without a permit. So you're going to have to go through the process of getting all your documentation with your consultants, going for permit, and once you get the permit, then you can start construction.
And so every city has their own zoning laws and kind of procedure. Basically, get in touch with the city, or would the architect do that for you as well?
Typically, your architect does that for you.
Yeah,
they would look at the zoning use of that area. Let's say it's in a existing building. They would look at the zoning on that building, what that building's zoned for. Is it allowed to have medical use? If it is, yes, then they would go into the actual space. Say you have 2,000 square feet of space, they're going to look at that space and then figure out, what you need to do within that space as far as access, life safety for lighting, emergency lighting, and wheelchair access if you need that, which you typically do, and design the space within what you leased, and then put in the package into the municipality for that. And then they would walk through the process of, if they have questions, come back and answer them to make sure that they get the approval. There is time factor that you have to look at. So this is part of, as a project manager, that we're looking at, how long does that process take? Is it from, I think you're going to want to know when you're going to open a practice, how long is this going to take, not just the build portion, but the overall portion of a project. So from the start of design, or obviously leasing a space, to the design, through the permitting, and then through construction, and then fixturing. So how long does that period take? You're looking at, I would say you're looking between overall, you're probably, depending on the municipality and how fast they process permits, you're looking at 2 to 3 months in the permitting and design phase. And then you're looking at 2 to 3 months in construction and another month in fixturing to set up the practice before you can get into operation. So overall, you're going to be between 8 to 10 months typically for something like that. It could be as long as a year depending if your lease search takes you 2-3 months to find the space that you want, then obviously it's gonna take you longer. The overall process is going to take you longer.
Yeah.
If you find a space that you like and it's in the right location and meets all the zoning that you need, then obviously you might be a bit shorter period.
So that raises an interesting question. Should I have access to an architect while I'm looking for places? Right? Like, say if I found 2 buildings, one might have some more complexities from a zoning and city permit than another, and that may impact my overall build cost. Or is that not really a significant thing to consider?
Yeah, I think having access to architect or a knowledgeable project manager during that period is important, because you don't want to go down the road of looking at space and, oh, I love this spot, it's perfect, and then you get your heart attached to it, and then all of a sudden you realize, this doesn't need, I can't get zoning, or this isn't zoned for the purpose of a dental practice. All of a sudden now you got to go and you just wasted all that time. Or is that obviously, if there was already an existing practice in there and you're just going in and doing a revamp, you can probably be fairly comfortable that the space works and it's zoned for that. But if you're looking at new spaces and it would obviously be beneficial to find that out earlier than later. You can obviously, if you're, depending on how much time you have, the information typically in municipalities is online, and you can do a lot of that work legwork yourself, or knowledgeable real estate agents also should be able to work with you as a leasing agent if they do a lot of commercial leasing. And that kind of begs us to another point. I think when you're going out and you're looking for a space, you want to have a knowledgeable leasing agent that you're working with, so that, again, if you have somebody that works in the residential sector and they're trying to lease commercial space, do they know all the zoning application type of things, where a knowledgeable commercial agent should know that stuff. And they also are going to be better at negotiating a lease agreement for you.
Yeah, that's helpful. So then in terms of looking at places, and there's a term called leasehold improvements. Can you tell us what those are, and what are these, I guess, from a high level perspective, and should we consider those?
Yeah, I think sometimes they call them TIAs, or tenant improvement allowances. And so, yeah, when you're looking at, that would be anything when you go into a new space or existing space, putting up wall partitions, putting in plumbing, putting in electrical, those would all be considered tenant improvements, because you're doing those for the purpose of your business. If you had improvements to the building, let's say the roofing and things like that, that's not really part of your business. So that would be done typically by the landlord on a separately. So you can sometimes, the tenant improvement allowances are the landlord may give you an allowance for, say, $5 to $25 a square foot or something like that, a range that they may do for you as part of your leasehold agreement. Or you may just lease a white box and you're responsible for all the tenant improvements that are inside of the space. There's, depending on the landlord and how they work, every landlord is different. They have different arrangements. So, that's part of your upfront negotiation that you would have when you're looking at leasing a space from a landlord.
Got it. And so that would all be in the contract of what you can or cannot do. I've heard that they also have like specific terms for leasehold improvements, like how much per square foot, and then how that can increase over time. Is that typically what can be expected when you look at leasehold improvement? That it will change, it's not static?
Well, leasehold improvement, you mean, I'm not sure I'm clear on that, but because I think typically leasehold improvement would be done up at the beginning. So it's like you go into a space and the landlord says, look, I'm going to give you X number. You're going to sign a 10-year lease, let's say, with us, and we're going to give you $10 a square foot to do work to your space. So if it's 2,000 square feet, we're going to give you $20,000 to work on your space. And that's typically done up front in your space. Then you're going to have PMI, which is where you're paying monthly to the shared cost of the building, the upkeep and maintenance on that building. And that can change. That can change in cost, because obviously if hydro goes up, gas goes up, things change. Those things change, and so then your overall expenditures monthly could change. And that's where you're probably negotiating with your landlords. Like, they're going to say, okay, if you're in a multiplex unit, you're going to take all the costs shared across all the tenants in that building. And then, they basically split them up at the end of the year and say, okay, well, hydro went up, so everybody's got to share in that cost. Snow removal went up slightly, so everybody's got to share in that cost.
Right. Okay. So that's helpful. So leasehold improvements upfront, TMI is afterwards, and negotiate that upfront. And then, so in terms of what does this cost? What will drive the cost drivers? Is it square footage? Is it number of operatories? What can?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors that are gonna drive the cost. And initially, you're gonna have your consultant's cost, which you'll get that locked in the beginning. You'll figure out how much my architecture fees, engineering fees are in the beginning, and they'll be with you through the project to get that the place designed and into occupancy with your. And then you're gonna have your builder, project manager, GC costs, and overall, you're looking at how that whole thing comes down to, obviously, square footage drives it. The more square feet you have, the more it's going to cost. But then within that square footage, if you have a lot of rooms and, let's say you need plumbing, hydro, and electrical in every room, then, your costs are going to be more higher per square foot. If you have larger rooms and, then you're going to have lower per square foot costs. There's going to be a balance in a dentist practitioner where you're going to look at it and go, well, I want more. It's the more rooms you have, the more patients you can see, the more dentists you can have working. So typically your room size is not going to be that large in a dental practice because you're trying to maximize your square footage cost to your patient view, how many patients you can see. So I think that's important. And then some of the driving factors that can add in where you need to build contingency in for is what is the existing building condition. And this is where, I think getting a knowledgeable project manager to come out and look at what you're looking at is going to help drive what is the hydro in the building, what's the structure of the building, what's the mechanical in the existing in that building. Those are factors that can drive costs substantially. Let's say you're going into an existing building and you're on the 14th floor of a building and you have to do a lot of coring of concrete and to get services to where the chairs are, and there's a finished space below you. Obviously, that's going to be expensive because you have to do work in somebody's finished space below you to get the services where you need them. And that can drive cost. Is there already existing mechanical in that space that works? So there's a lot of factors, I would say, in sort of the existing structure. If you're going into a new as-built building that's going to be purpose-built for you, then obviously those costs they won't be as high because you can locate, you have 6 exam rooms, you need water and electrical to the chair locations. You can plan that in while they're building the facility. And that's less expensive, obviously, to put that into new construction as opposed to go into an existing and have to either core or break concrete up or go through existing structures.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's almost a little different than residential where, we might save some money by buying a fixer-upper and going that route. But there could be in this commercial kind of version here is building it from scratch could save you some cash and some time. You're not demoing and ripping things out. Yeah,
for sure. Because you're obviously going into a new space it can be purpose built for you. Now you obviously you may be paying more for a lease because right. You're going to be, your lease cost may be higher, but within a market, it depends on your market. So obviously if you're in more of a suburban area and somebody's building you're building out strip mall type of facilities, the cost to build those is fairly reasonable. If you're in a downtown core environment where real estate prices are typically a lot higher per square foot, and so you need typically dense buildings, higher buildings to cover that off, it may be hard to find a new building in the core of large cities. You may have to go into existing buildings because purpose-built buildings aren't as easy to come by.
Right. And so the next question then, we've been covering a lot. What are some kind of building no-nos? What should people watch out for? Do you have any stories you want to share? Good, bad, the ugly?
I think we touched on some of the pros and cons already, some things, but I think the more information, the more that you have a plan, the more that you're dialed in before you start construction is important. So, it's sort of the old adage is it's easy to change on paper, but when it's put in concrete, it's not easy to change. So your cost factor can be more controlled when you have a better plan initially. You spend the time up front. A lot of times I think that we did one project for a dentist and that the company that was supplying the equipment did the drawings for the practice. And this was early on. We hadn't done many dental practices. So, we were learning like you do on all projects. And, they wanted all the services to the chair, for example, like they wanted water, a drain, electrical to the chair, which when you have 5 chairs and you have still this coring and gymnastics to get there, it's fairly expensive to get those services there. But when the chairs came in, the dentist didn't actually need all those services. He didn't want those specific chairs to those in that location. He just wanted water to the chair. He didn't need a drain because he had a different system for that. So, I think that's where the planning comes in. And then obviously, we spent $26,000 to put these services in that weren't being used. So it's a waste of money in that instance. But that's where knowing what you're doing and planning ahead is it helps. That was sort of like, well, I don't know what chairs I'm going to use, and these guys did the plan for me, and so we're going to just follow the plan. And then you end up spending money where you don't need to.
Mm.
That's I think that's where the trust factor and getting involved with, the right partners, so that everybody's working with the same end goal and plan is up, and trying to do the best thing for the client at the end.
Right.
So I think there's obviously looking at the building and understanding what you're going into is, I think, really important. I mean, because you can obviously fall into, it's no different than in the residential world. If you buy a home and you don't look at it and you think, oh, all I need to do is, I want to just fix this up and maybe sell it or move into it. And then you didn't do your homework and you move in and everything's wrong with the house. Now you have to redo mechanical, electrical, plumbing, roofing, structural's bad. Obviously now you think, oh, I'm going to spend $100,000. And now you're into a project that's $300,000. It's 3x of what you thought it was going to be. If you don't go out and understand the space you're going into and just talk generically about, oh, it's going to be $200 a square foot or $300 a square foot to build out my practice, those numbers work. That's great to work on a budget that way, but then you need to actually know what the space is, because let's say your mechanical costs go from $25,000 to $50,000. All of a sudden, one line item doubled in your budget because it was an existing site condition or you have to upgrade the power to it because the power isn't there for what you need. All of a sudden, that can be a $25,000 hit that you didn't count on. So obviously, picking things like changing your tile, if you need to save money in a budget, you can do that. You can pick a $4 tile instead of a $10 tile. You can't do much about your electrical, your mechanical. If it has to be done, it has to be done. You're going to be in a position where you're like, well, I have to do it. I have to pay the extra $25,000 to upgrade the panel because I need the power.
Wow. So then you do all your due diligence. You've got the design, you've got the architect in place, you've worked through whether you're doing freehold or making leasehold improvements, you have the team in place. What does timing look like? Because it's often in construction, if you're driving on a highway in a major city, we're going to complete this road by the end of the summer and construction goes forever. Or I've had friends that were building houses or renos, it's over time and over budget. So it sounds like working with a project manager, you can get the budget pinned down. How does timing work? Like, do these projects finish on time? And is it a thing of over promise and under deliver from a project manager or general contractor standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And obviously we all drive around, like you said, we see construction sites, we have friends that tell us stories and oh, my project started and I'm not in my house. And I think on the commercial end of things, it is different than residential because there's multiple players involved. So if you have your plan and you're not making changes, one thing that drives schedule and to not hit schedule is change. That's one of the major factors of why construction schedules don't hit. And that's across the board. So for example, you decide, well, I want to change the layout now of the, I don't like the way the rooms are laid out, or I walked in the space and I want to change now the way it feels, which is fine, but it adds time to the project and nobody can tell you it doesn't. So, I mean, you come in and say the steel walls are framed, and all of a sudden you say, oh, I don't like the way these exam rooms are. It doesn't feel open enough. Or it doesn't feel like the flow's here and I want to change it. That's going to add time to the project. I think getting a critical path early on, right at the beginning of your project, is key, from zoning, planning, design, and having all the consultants have time frames that they have to work to. Where a lot of the delays are on commercial projects is not the construction side all the time. Is a lot of times it's in the planning and the getting the permitting phase through. So depending on what municipality you're in and what you're working with, sometimes the municipalities are slow. You need to know that may take a month to 6 weeks to get a permit. Maybe it takes 2 months, depending on what it is. So you need to know that up front so that you're not, because you're typically going to sign some lease, hold a lease with at the beginning of your lease, you're going to say, okay, we're going to get 3 months to build from the time we start, that we're not going to pay rent on, for example. So that's the thing you hear mostly from commercial tenants. The drive is, can I get this thing built in the time that I'm not paying rent? So in order to do that, you need to have your design ready to go, get into permit, so you don't chew up your free rent period with just waiting on the process to get your permit and get going on construction. You typically want to try to get that construction period working while you're getting your free rent, let's call it.
Yeah. Good play.
But I think, I think that the scheduling is, we've been able to build out some practices lately, in 8 to 10 weeks in the construction phase. Those are, on average, 1,500 square feet practices. That's the construction phase of the projects. And that's working to a tight schedule and been able to, that's being able to do our procurement ahead of time, like our millwork, and knowing what we're doing ahead of time. It's very difficult to build out a practice in 8 to 10 weeks. If you can't do that if you award your contract to your project manager or your builder. Okay, I want to start, let's say, in 30 days from now, but you don't hire that builder project manager until 2 weeks before you start, and then you want to get it built in 8 to 10 weeks. It's not going to happen, because you're not going to be able to get the millwork built fast enough, because you have to go to your sub trades to get them to design it, work together. So I think having that team in place early is going to help with driving that schedule. Some of the things that are out of your control are, you have to be on your consultants to make sure that they're hitting their dates with design and putting things in for the application process. And having a project manager working together with you will help you stay on track.
That's super key. So with that, as you guys are quarterbacking and folks are working with project managers to build their practice, and you're talking about making sure that, timelines are hit, what do construction contracts look like? And is there a standard that folks use? Probably, if you have a sample, we'll probably link it to the show notes. But any thoughts or ideas on that, on what people can expect when they're dealing with the contract?
Yeah, so there's a couple different styles of contract you can use. You can use a fixed price contract, or cost plus, or project management contract. So a fixed price contract would be that you basically have a set of drawings that detail everything you want to do in your practice, and then you would take those drawings out to more like a GC model to, it could be project managers as well, but to them, and then say, look, we're going to basically, here's the drawings, here's all the information, and I want a fixed price to build this out. And they're going to put their own margins in there. So whatever they charge, if they charge 20% or 10% margin, they're going to build that in. And you're typically only going to get a lump sum number at the end, or they might not break it out very detailed. They may say, this is going to cost you $600,000 to build this out. And, they may not give you it. You would put out, it would be like done through a tender process. So they would, you would have certain line items that tell you, okay, the cost of this is X, and then the total is X. If you work the project management model contract, that's going to be more like on a percentage fee of the project. And so if the project costs $600,000, the project manager may charge 10% fee on that to manage that project. And then you would, inside that contract, would spell out, what that project manager is doing for those management fees. Mm-hmm. Putting together scheduling, putting together procurement, putting together, and then running the site as construction is going on, having weekly reports, getting all the inspections through the building department, and that would be more of a cost plus or a project management contract. Both have pros and cons. I would say, obviously, trust is a factor in a project management contract. Trust is a factor in all contracts. But I think, with a GC contract or a fixed price contract, what the con would be if they underbid. If you underbid something, where do you get that money from? So let's say you bid the mechanical and you short on the mechanical just because things happen and you have a lot of items to bid and you're short. And there isn't a change. So it's being built as per the drawing, and you shorted it in your budget, then you're going to have to get that money from somewhere. So how do you get that money from somewhere? You're going to have to cut a corner possibly, or you're going to have to eat it. Right. So in a project management scenario like that, then you would be like, well, I you would be like working together with the client and say like, look, here we had allowed this, but now we realize that it's not going to come in at that, and work together with the client now. So it's a level of comfort you have to have. You have to have a trust, obviously, factor to be like, is that really, you could obviously see a scenario where it's like, well, everything comes in as an extra, or we need more money for everything in a project management contract, so you need to have a trust factor there. But you also want your practice to be built well. You can see on the GC side or the fixed price side, if something isn't specified, you're not going to get a selection on it. If there's, only in the drawings it says baseboard, and it isn't a specific type of baseboard, you could end up with vinyl baseboard, but you want wood baseboard. Well, that's where you have to have trust, and also you have to know what your level of what you want to be finished is.
Yeah. It sounds like communication is critical as well. Like I always say, as managing different projects and working with different clients, like give me the bad news first, because bad news requires some type of action. Good news doesn't require action. Good news, great. We'll go for a drink later and celebrate. But for bad news, give that to me right away. And so that goes hand in hand with the trust you're talking about. I think trust and communication and liking the people you're working with, having a kind of a good feel, and managing the expectations of communication would be critical in that, because things happen, like you're saying, like stuff happens, and suppliers could get something wrong, or you get delivered the wrong vinyl baseboards instead of the wood baseboards. These things can happen. So that communication and trust is critical. So with all of that having said, how does someone pay for this, right? Like folks that have been dealing with, say, a house mortgage or renting a place and having a lease. So you've got a lease, say, and then now you have to upfront this construction cost, or you bought the building and you've got this construction cost. Is it a monthly fee? Is it broken into chunks? Like how does someone pay? How does a dentist pay for this creating this practice?
Yeah, typically it's paid. You're going to have your budget, then you're going to agree to what the cost of construction is, and then you're going to pay those as you go along. You're going to pay draws, and the draw structure, for us typically is monthly. You basically take a deposit up front on the project, so it might be 10% deposit because typically you're already in your first month you're already into costs because you're procuring things. You have you've established you've put a deposit in with the mill worker. You've ordered tile. You've put deposits in on things you need because your construction period is short. So you've already put in deposits on things so that once you start construction, you have proper things prepared that you need. So you're going to say have a 10% deposit up front, and then you're going to get monthly billings as you go. So over the course of a build, if it's 3 months, you're going to have typically it would be probably third type of thing. So if it was a $600,000 build, you're probably looking at $200,000 a month roughly to pay out as you go. And then there would be typically a holdback. In construction, you have a 10% holdback, and that would be paid after everything is done. You move in, and there's no liens on the project. So the liens that's like where you want to ask when you're working with a knowledgeable project manager builders that the liens are put in place to protect the client, so that let's say a subcontractor, for example, your drywall seller doesn't pay his supplier of drywall. That supplier of drywall can then say lien your business, say, well, I didn't get paid for the drywall that went into your practice. You got to pay me. Somebody's got to pay me for this. So that's what the holdback does. It basically makes sure that after there's a certain period of time, it's 45 days in certain jurisdictions, 45 days after completion of the project, everybody's been paid. They give us a statutory declaration that says, there's no subcontract, no suppliers, nobody's lien the property, then the project, then we can pay out the remaining 10%, which is usually 45.
That's so important. I didn't know that's how that works. The holdback protects you against any liens that a subtrade could do. That's super important.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are misconstrued about holdbacks, and especially in the residential world. But people think, the holdbacks are there for deficiencies or to not pay deficiencies to the builder. They're not. It's a legal situation. It's not about deficiencies. It's not about I have a paint nick and I have a little scratch here on the tile. That's not what the holdback is for. It's not legally for that. Legally, it's there to protect the clients to say like, yeah, did everybody get paid on the project? And that could be for labor, that could be for material costs.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Super informative. Is there anything else that you want to share or think, or guidance or advice you'd give to dentists out there looking to start a practice? Today is May 27th. We're basically in the middle of COVID-19. Some folks may have decided in January, yeah, I'm going to do this. 2020 is my time. And any words of advice or encouragement or for folks out there?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is in the industry is like people are moving forward. I think that there's some changes. I think a lot of the design changes are going to be going back, maybe backwards a little, like not in aesthetics, but that you're going to the trend in orthodontic and dentistry was to have more open sort of concept office and exam space. Obviously now with COVID, it's switching back to be individual rooms that can be segmented off. They can be sterilized, and there's space time between patient visits and each room. So I think that's going to change. And then obviously mechanical systems and air filtration is changing. What exchange you need. Air exchange has to be done every hour within a space. HEPA filter systems put in. And, so I think that's key is like looking at the new, staying up with the times, being current, and building a practice that hopefully we won't have another COVID situation in the near future or ever, but you don't know if you're going to have that. So you probably want to look at build something that is going to last, and you don't have to go back and retrofit something down the road. Now, obviously, with an existing practice, you're going to need to retrofit and have air purification systems within the rooms as opposed to overall purification system that manages the whole office, because that's going to be a lot more costly to get into ripping and retrofitting into it. I would say have fun and enjoy the process is one thing to. It's exciting. It's pick a part that you're passionate about would be my statement. Like if you're passionate about something to do with the design, then have some fun with that part and make it your own. But then let the professionals do their job at the end.
Yeah.
The people that do the building, the people that know about the mechanical, the structural, those things, and sort of concentrate, use your skills where they're best used. And obviously there's a lot of people that like to micromanage, and a lot of type A personalities, and that's great, but that doesn't necessarily always help with the driving of the schedule and driving to get things done. Designers and architects do what they do, builders do what they do, dentists do what they do. And when you start to get a lot of overlap, that's where things can fall apart, or you see delays come, because the dentist wants to be the architect, and typically the architect doesn't want to be the dentist, but and the builder doesn't want to be the dentist. But to try and really focus in on the things that are key to your business, that make you passionate, and that will help.
That's great advice, and I love the insight around if you're looking to build a practice now, considering having something that is kind of a closed operatories, kind of not, I can't say pandemic proof, but considering something alternative to the open concept practice, I think that's great advice. You could still maybe use glass, and the architects and designers can come up with all of that, but how do you enclose a space, have it feel warm, but allow social distancing perhaps, and people feeling safe in there, and the air exchangers and the HVAC? That's great advice. Mike, that was an awesome session. So densely packed with information for folks. We're going to create some show notes for folks so that they can peruse and really digest all of what was said today. Where can folks find you on social media? Where can they check you guys out?
Well, we can go on our website, which is rippleprojects.com, and then I don't know what our Instagram handle is. So.
All good. We'll put it in the show notes. I love your guys' IG. It's awesome. But yeah, totally. We'll include all of that stuff in the show notes. And yeah, thanks so much, Mike. And again, principal partner at Ripple Projects for taking the time today. and check them out at rippleprojects.com.